put these on.
SBS Seoul Digital Forum.
SBS Seoul Digital Forum 2012. Today is the second day and the last session. I'm from KAIST. My name's Woontack. I'm from GSCT. I actually prepared to moderate in the English language, but then again, I decided to change my language to the Korean language. If you want to know the reason why, you can ask the question during the Q&A session. Today, we're talking about the topic of coexistence from various different dimensions. This session, we're looking at whether the real and virtual reality can coexist. When we talk about visualization in the digital age, we, of course, would have to talk about the virtual reality. Since the beginning of the virtual reality, which is end of 1990s, virtual reality is a concept that has started to diminish in the minds of the people. And in recent days, people are once again interested in virtual reality or augmented reality. Now, is there really a possibility for us to really work with these concepts of augmented reality and virtual reality? And we will delve into this topic.
슬라이드를 좀 넘겨.
Can I have a pointer, please?
예, 고맙습니다. 예, 지금 일반적으로 이제
The term mixed reality is a definition of bringing together reality and virtuality. And depending on which side you want to emphasize, we can call this augmented reality or augmented virtuality. As you can see from this slide, do you think digital technology can fully replace analog? There could be differing views on this point. In my view, I feel that digital is not going to completely replace analog. I think digital will coexist peacefully with analog technology. As you can see from this demonstration video, rather than e-book completely replacing the conventional form of a book, of course, e-book has its strength and competitive advantage, but people can make use of such electronics books to really gain additional experience, which were impossible from the conventional book. So we call this a digilog book. This is based on analog contents. There are digital aspects that are overlaid on top of this. So analog and digital, if you put that together, you get this word digilog. And I think digilog is a possibility into the future. Then how do we make sure that analog and digital coexist side by side? As you can see from this video clip, traditionally we use the keyboard and mouse to access information. But rather than using those devices, this information is shown within our real space, and new information is created and it's added, and this information that is created can be shared via this space. So under this phenomenon of bringing reality and virtuality together, now that can be summed up as a digilog life. And what is possible in this life? Bringing together reality and virtuality, and in order to enable services, there are some technical aspects one needs to think about. The virtual reality that mimics reality has to exist, and if it can be overlaid on top of our real reality, then this space, there is no distance from one point to the other. You would it would make it feel as if these 2 points are close to one another. If you look at this left video clip, this is actually my lab. So there is a physical lab, the real lab that exists. And at the very end corner on the right, this is a virtual space. So virtual space and the real space merges. And you see a portion of that virtual reality, and they merge. And in real life, the avatars or elephants, you could make it look as if they are walking in this space. And there's a physical object that you see on the slide, and physical object and virtual objects can interact against one another. So the physical object that actually exists in real life, it can actually hit this virtual object. The vice versa would be possible. This virtual object or virtual person is pushing this physical, real-life object. If we embody such a virtual reality within such ubiquitous platform, I believe that new types of information can be used. So these new technologies that have emerged, as I have mentioned previously, virtual reality was a hot topic in the end of 1990s, and as people started to forget about it. It felt as if virtual reality had demised, and maybe augmented reality may tread the same path. To make sure that augmented reality doesn't follow the footsteps of virtual reality, we have to think of ways to really embedding it into the lives of the people. First thing we can think about is, if you look at the objective of virtual reality, it's bringing together virtual reality, which is highly real, and merging that to reality. But if it ends there, it's just going to be a boring merger between the two spaces. In order to breathe in life to this real space and virtual space, the intelligence in the reality space and how you combine that to the virtual space is, I think, very important. In that sense, the concept of context awareness is important. How to bring together the augmented reality and augmented virtuality. I think more important than that is participation of the average people. Maybe I can put it this way. Let's say a 3D merger of a highly real content. Now, content is very important. Content has to be real, and content is the king. But I think context is the queen. Now, queen usually controls the king, so context is also very important. But what's more important than king and the queen is that the users have to be able to participate in a fun and exciting way. Participation of the user, I think, and the users themselves is the emperor that reigns over that king and the queen. So bringing together reality and virtuality, the augmented reality, the virtual reality where users can actually participate. Once these spaces are made, I think that new types of UI and UX will be required. Recently, Korean government has started to place importance and have started a project under the name of human-centered coexistence space. We are looking to study into this area for about 10 years. We want to find ways where there is a peaceful coexistence amongst all of these different factors. And we are trying to find out and define this human-centered coexistence space. Now, peaceful coexistence can be explored in many different ways. We would like to find out how these spaces could improve productivity of people's daily lives. And today we have many distinguished speakers who will be sharing with us their insight relating to this topic of mixed reality. As I was preparing for my talk, I actually provided this list of questions to our speakers, and I asked that you please reflect them when you provide your part of the talk and provide your presentation. Now, we have three distinguished speakers who are with us this session. The person who's closest to me is Mr. Howard CHARNEY. He is the Senior Vice President of Cisco. And next to him, we have Adrian Cheok, professor from Keio University, majoring in mixed reality. And last but not least, we have with us Genevieve Bell. You probably heard her very interesting talk yesterday. She majored in anthropology, and I would think that she is the person who's bringing in a very fresh perspective on mixed reality from an anthropologist's perspective. So I look forward to that. So let's begin with Howard.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to talk to you about augmented reality or mixed reality. And I'll try to give you first some inexorable trends which guide our planet presently. And then we're going to talk about some positive uses of the technology. Although some of the uses that I'm going to speak about are aspirational, they don't exist except in the minds of the people who are undertaking them, but others are real. So let's begin. There's three main drivers that you cannot escape. One is the proliferation of video. Two, people are mobile. They are not tethered. And therefore, mobility is a very important consideration. And three, we are creating data at a prodigious rate, and we have to have some place to put it. And the place we put it is the cloud. Now, the cloud stands for many things. I hate this term because it's obfuscating. It doesn't really explain what's going on. But the cloud is this elastic medium, both for computation as well as storage. That's inexorable. You cannot get away from it. The second thing that I'd like to discuss with you is big data. Now, when you speak about mixed reality or you speak about augmented reality, I guarantee you are going to create a lot of data. A lot of data. You cannot manipulate animations without having lots of data traveling back and forth across the network. And of course, the definition of big data means time-sensitive, many sources, many formats. Now, take a look at this. Let's talk about business models and how they're evolving. So you see in this picture, the man on the left is John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco, and he's in Bangalore. And the people on the right are in San Jose. We did this. This was done with holograms. We did this. This cost to do one time 10 to the fifth dollars. Do you understand what I just said? 10 to the fifth dollars. Now, some of you might also remember this. This appeared just recently on the internet. This man died in 1995, but he was considered to be a very accomplished rapper. So they created an image for him, and he did a performance just recently. But when he did this performance, you should understand how this was done. They did two songs. It took 4 months to do it. It is two-dimensional, not three-dimensional, two-dimensional. It uses technology that was developed in the 1870s. It's called Pepper's Ghost. And what it does is it projects an image through a semi-transparent screen, and it gives the illusion of 3 dimensions, but it isn't really. It's 2 dimensions, and they will not tell us how much it costs to do it, but about 10 to the fifth dollars. One time, 10 to the fifth dollars. So we don't have a business model yet that supports the use of augmented reality or mixed reality. But let me share with you some examples that are kind of exciting. And this one comes from the Technical University of Science and Technology from Trondheim. So geologists, if you're a geology student, you don't really understand a rock when you look at it. But so what they're trying to do is, through the use of glasses and through a tablet, be able to look at some rocks and be able to illuminate for the geology student what it is they're looking at. And they could send this information to another student and another tablet, so that you could draw lines on the rocks, and then you would be able to see in 3 dimensions how those rocks were formed. And then you'd be able to send that information to yet somebody else located somewhere else. It's kind of exciting. I hope they're successful at it. Here's another one that's kind of interesting. This is aspirational. This doesn't exist. But it's very clear that we will have augmented or mixed reality for surgical training. It's the right way to go. Now, it also turns out that in Canada, the Canadians have made it a priority that they will lead the world in immersive surgical training. And so you see there a graphic, but that one actually is being used to train doctors and nurses because there are procedures that are done that are so dangerous that we really don't want to practice on human beings. And there are procedures that are done so infrequently that how could you train somebody? On the right there is another example. Now that one is aspirational, and that one assumes that you would be able to look at a patient through some kind of a contact lens or glasses and get vital signs almost instantly. Now this one is interesting because trying to come up with a cure for AIDS is very, very difficult because the AIDS molecule, the HIV molecule, is three-dimensional. But what this man is doing at the Scripps Research Institute, is using a three-dimensional model of the AIDS virus, and what he's trying to do is fit another three-dimensional molecule of some pharmaceutical creation, because they have to fit together in order to find a cure. This is actually real. They're really using this technology presently, and maybe they'll be successful, we hope. Here's another one that's interesting. So that man is Michio Kaku. And Michio Kaku is a professor of theoretical physics at the City College of New York. And Michio Kaku is actually one of the progenitors of string theory. So Michio Kaku believes that one day we will have contact lenses, and you will see the world through contact lenses, and on those imprinted on that contact lens will be information which is valuable to you, such as, I met you before. I know who you are. You will never have to meet somebody and not know their name ever again. Now, so there's a question, though, about, okay, so I get this information. What will I do about it? How will I be able to control my environment? Well, we already have an answer for that, because in 2008, it was proven that you could probably use your thoughts to affect your world around you. And that graphic is from an article that was written where a monkey at Duke University in the southeastern part of the United States was taught to control a robot in Tokyo using only her thoughts. This has been done. So Michio Kaku believes that we will have glasses or we will have contact lenses, and we will control our world around us using that technology. Here's one last example for you. So 10% of the people on this planet are colorblind. Now, colorblindness is not fatal, but it's very inconvenient. And so many people who see that graphic cannot see the number on the left side. So this man, his name is Daniel Kaminsky, or you'll see him in a moment, he came up with a mechanism to determine colorblindness to deal with colorblindness using an application on an iPhone. And so it's actually very inconvenient not being able to see streetlights or be able to determine colors of vegetables or colors of your clothing in the morning. So this man developed an app where you could put your iPhone up and you could see. You could see in color. And this could possibly change people's lives. And that's what this technology is about. Thank you.
You are so punctual. Next is Adrian. Great.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about connectivity related to mixed reality. So neuroscientists and psychologists have found recently that we're not the computer in our brain that we thought we were in the 70s when we studied artificial intelligence. In fact, we're highly networked by our social attachments. And not only that, we're networked in our body. Our brain is basically like an internet connected to all of our body. And in fact, thinking happens inside our body, not just in our head. But currently, although we can access almost infinite information on the internet, basically text and audio and video, it's still very difficult to have a real intuitive sense of presence with each other, because we're not really able to transmit the whole body experience. So I think in the next generation of internet, we'll move from the age of information communication to experience communication. So I think we'll augment our senses with all of the 5 senses of our body. And in fact, although we might think that we are quite logical creatures, in fact, it's been shown that more than half of our communication is non-verbal. So we have to consider this very deeply for augmenting our reality. Professor Woontack talked about augmented reality with audio and video, so I'll move straight into touch. Touch is very important, and this slide shows that no matter where around the world, this study was taken in Japan and US, although the intensity of the way we touch each other changes, basically we all touch each other in the same places. So touch is a very universal communication. I've been doing some work over the years, such as how to communicate by touch through the internet. At first, I thought it'd be good to be able to touch our pets through the internet. If you're at work and you cannot be with your pet, then you can hug them. And later on, I looked at some work on how parents and children could communicate by touch. Children and infants is very important to have touch communication, especially with their parents. So this system allows parents and children to hug each other through the internet. And I think this will soon go into products. Right now we wear watches and rings, and you could soon imagine that you could squeeze or stroke your ring or band, and then your partner, your loved one, can feel a squeeze on their ring. And this, in binary terms, it's a very simple communication. But I think if you receive the touch from your girlfriend or your husband, it's more meaningful than just the binary bits. Somehow touch is connecting to our emotions. I'm also looking at how touch is important for communicating with physical media, such as robots. Can we have affection or even feeling some kind of love for robots, like we do for pets, for example? And some things we just can't communicate, through a screen. If you want to kiss someone through the internet, it should be physical. So this device that I'm making allows you to kiss someone. It measures the pressure on your lips and transmits that pressure onto your partner's lips, and vice versa. Smell and taste is something that we rarely think about when we're talking about communication on the internet. But I think that it's very important. It's been shown that taste and smell is a sense which directly connects to the emotional centers of our brain. So it can bypass the logical part, and in fact smell can directly trigger memories or trigger emotions. And it's very much related to culture and experience. So if we can communicate this through the internet, I think it would be enhance the sense of presence. So the challenges are that smell and taste is still very analog. It's very difficult to communicate through the internet because it's chemical-based. It's very difficult to scale, and of course impractical to transmit by wires. So we're at the very early stage of this, but I hope that engineers and scientists will be able to work on these challenges. Some of the work that we're doing, including when you meet someone, you'll be able to transmit smell. We're doing this with the special glasses which can transmit smell, so you can understand the person's characteristics, and when you meet them, you share smells together with these eyeglasses. And even extending this to food and cooking. As you know, when you meet friends or your family, normally the thing you'll do is eat together. So somehow eating is not just for protein to your body, it's also a communication. So we're making systems where you can cook with each other through the internet with sensors and actuators in kitchen devices. And even sending a food message. So if it's your grandmother's birthday, instead of sending her an email message, you can send her a message which she can eat. And this is some early prototypes. It's still a long way to go, but we're building some prototypes in our laboratory. As I mentioned, we have to really digitize this to communicate through internet. So one system that we're working on at the early stage here is a system that you can put on your tongue, and it will electrically stimulate your taste buds on your tongue and generate taste sensation in your brain. And although this is very early work, now we can generate the basic tastes such as salty, sour, bitter, and sweet to a person by stimulating their tongue electrically. And what you can imagine, this could be some kind of like a lollipop. You can put it on your tongue and someone can send you a message. If it's a sweet message, it's a nice message. If your husband or wife sends you a bitter message, maybe they're angry at you. And smell is much more challenging because the smell receptors are actually behind our nose. And so right now we're working with some professors in the medical school, actually, Professor Anatomy, to see how could we generate smell in our brain digitally. And to do this, we're thinking of non-invasive coils that you put on your head, magnetic coils. We can measure people's neural reactions when they eat certain foods, and then use pulsed magnetic fields to stimulate the brain at those same points. So theoretically this can work, but this is still going to take a few years of research before this become a product. But I think you can see that what we're moving to with augmented reality is actually direct brain interface. So my main point is when you think about communication, augmented reality, think about all the senses because that's very important for being human. Thank you.
Right. Well, I want to make us change gears here and think a little bit more conceptually. So I want to kind of up-level this conversation a little bit and think about what it might mean to talk about the virtual and the real from a people perspective, not just a technology perspective. And I want to start by putting my own kind of stake in the ground here, which is to say that we've always been both virtual and real. This is not necessarily a new thing and something that just arrived when we had digital technology. So what do I mean by that? Well, I grew up in Central and Northern Australia in the 1970s and 1980s with Aboriginal people who were living on their own country. And when they told the stories of that country, they talked about the ancestors who'd given that country form. They talked about the people that had lived there before them. They talked about the ghosts and the spirits and the gods who inhabited their land. They didn't imagine those were real things. They were in some ways virtual things. But there was a notion there of coexistence between the living people and all the other spirits and energy and ghosts and memories that inhabited the place. And when people talked about how you navigated those boundaries between the real and the imagined and the virtual, it was about rituals. It was about moments when you became the ancestors. And if we look across lots of other world cultures, it's very clear that there's always been a sense of the virtual. Whether we thought of that as gods, whether we thought of that as spirits, whether we thought of that as ghosts, there's always been a set of virtual worlds that coexisted with the physical worlds. And there were places that we went to visit those virtual moments and to have more virtual experiences. Churches, temples, all manner of places, right? So this notion that somehow the virtual and the real only come into existence and only become attention when digital technology is the first kind of thing I want to suggest we might need to rethink. The second for me, and it really draws on what Howard was saying, was that if we imagine that we are going to go to a world where there is a cloud, where there is big data, one of the very first things we have to remember is that the network is unevenly distributed. This is actually a photo from my hometown in Australia. It always reminds me that unlike Seoul, Korea, the internet isn't everywhere. And that if we want to think about virtual reality, if we want to think about the mix of the virtual and the real, it relies on the virtual being ever present and available. And frankly, we know that's not ever going to be the case in quite the ways that some of this technology demands. So as we think about what it means to talk about mixed reality, augmented reality, one of the things we need to get our head around and start to handle from both a technical and a social point of view is that sometimes that network isn't going to be available. So if Adrian and Howard are right and we're going to create headsets that let us know that we've met someone before, we're also going to have to work out that sometimes that headset isn't going to function. We're going to be left having absolutely no idea who that person is unless we can genuinely remember it the way we once did. So imagining that this technology is going to be full-time and supplant everything is in some ways both seductive and dangerous. Of course, it's also the case that while we have touch coming and gesture and smell, always an interesting one, and all of those things, we know that sometimes those are not going to be the appropriate things. There are places where touch is never going to work and you're just going to want to send an email. There are certain kinds of people you probably shouldn't reach out and smell. There are probably certain people who you shouldn't kiss with your technology. There are going to be moments when it's still going to be that were left at the temple. And the people I was with explained to me that when you went to this particular temple, you either bought or took with you a plastic Buddha and left it behind. And the temple was full of them. And every single one of those Buddhas, as I thought about it, represented a prayer, a hope, a wish, a desire for a different outcome. And as you were there, you could see that that was a place that was deeply spiritual, that was a place that was full of people's hopes and energy. You can't turn those into virtual things. Those have to be real things. And I'm willing to bet in most of your lives, you can also think of the things that you'd never want to have virtual. Because the physicality of them, the realness of them actually turns out to be critically important. By the same token, there are a whole lot of things that are actually much happier being virtual. So in the kind of Kevin Kelly language from this morning of what does technology want, there are some things that don't ever want to be physical, they want to be virtual. Because if they are virtual, if they are zeros and ones, they move in the network more easily. They don't need to have a physical presence. We don't need to think about what it is that big data will actually look like because it can in some ways simply be stored. And as we imagine this mixing of the virtual and the real, as much as there are things that will steadfastly want to be real, there are going to be things that are steadfastly only ever going to want to be digital. And how we balance those things becomes a really interesting challenge and question. It's of course also the case as you start to imagine this entire world of augmented reality, of mixed reality, there are going to be things that human beings just worry about. And things that become valued and devalued as a result. Think about what happened when Cyworld and Facebook and RenRen and QQ Zone started to tell us when our friends' birthdays were. Remembering your friend's birthday suddenly became a less sign that you were fabulous and more a sign that you just had technology that reminded you of it. And what that meant in terms of thinking through social interactions became really complicated. And so as we imagine augmenting our senses, augmenting our capacities, we have to imagine that it changes some of the ways we value things. It changes how we interact and engage with people. And I can guarantee you, as both Kevin and Tim said this morning, there will be things that make people deeply anxious as a result of this. Are you smelling me because you like me? What does it mean that you are sending me bitter smells? What does it mean that, you're looking in goggles and not at me? All of those things are going to be things we work through and are going to be things we become deeply, in some ways, anxious about. Because it is the case of every new technology that comes along, they come with anxieties about what it means for us as human beings, what it means for us as different cultures, what it means for appropriate social interaction and social engagement. So as we think about these things, we can't think about them without also having the conversation about how will they be regulated, both at a formal level, i.e. what is the government role in all of this, but also how will they be socially regulated? Is it going to be the case that you can bring your augmented reality glasses home, but you can't bring them into the bedroom? Because we like to still think that you might have to pay attention to me without knowing all my secrets. And starting to imagine what the rules are there is going to be incredibly complicated. And for me, ultimately, it comes down to one thing here. It doesn't matter how smart the technology is. It doesn't matter how wonderful the technical solution might be or how clever it is. If it doesn't deliver an experience that someone loves, if it doesn't deliver an experience people care about, if it doesn't do something that supports our social relationships, our relationships with each other, it just becomes technology in search of a problem. And I think there's a really interesting argument about why it is we've been talking about virtual and mixed reality for 20 or 30 years and it's never landed in our lives. And I think part of the reason is because we haven't found yet the experience that it supports that we can't live without. So with that, I'm hoping we can now have a fierce conversation about what that all looks like. Thank you.
세 분의 발표가 끝났습니다.
Thank you to our three speakers. So while the audience thinks about the questions, why don't I make a summary. Howard talk about various applications in the various industrial field. And the augmented reality that you see is very much emphasized on the visual aspect. But other than visual and auditory, we can even move on to touches as well as various different other sensors. The possibility of sensory and possibility of touch is also quite limitless. And Genevieve talked about whether this augmented reality is valid. And I thank you for that. So after listening to our three presenters, when it comes to these AR technologies, and once these technologies come into our lives, do you really think that they will enrich your lives?
Do I really think they'll enrich our lives?
At the very beginning, I told you that I was requested that this session should be fun and interesting. That's what the organizers asked me. Because making it fun and interesting and exciting is one of the most difficult things for me to do. And I felt that if I spoke in my own mother tongue, it would be much easier for me to making it more exciting and fun. So that's why I chose not to speak English. So that's the reason why I decided to speak in Korean rather than English. There's a second reason. I was in the audience listening to other presenters, and I really had a unique experience. Even without speaking English, there was a very natural discussion taking place with different languages. And I just wanted to experience this myself, whether it would actually be fun and whether it would be possible. And now that I'm on this stage, I think it is working. I'm discussing with these other English speakers in Korean language. I think this is actually quite helpful. Without the stress of speaking English, the technology helps us translate the different languages. And if I can freely speak the language that I feel more comfortable in, I feel that the barriers between and the walls between people could be lowered.
이 증강현실의 응용이 뭘까?
The second aspect I would like to think about is the possible applications of these virtual realities. In technology, there is a lot of development, and we invest a lot of money in R&Ds of various technologies. But at the end of the day, you have to think about the usability of these technologies. Where would these technologies be used? If we are using mixed reality, maybe in moderating this session, for instance, at the end of this year, Google says that they will make a glass that will help people experience mixed reality, although at a very rudimentary level. So if you wear glasses and if you were looking at our members of our panel list, then there will be automatic translation, and depending on the context, they may be able to deliver a very summarized version of that lecture. And if you are wearing this glass and look at us, then you can also search the relevant topics from the internet and find the relevant information that will help you further understand what is being discussed during this session. I think that is one of the real life applications that we can think about. I think that maybe the panelists could add some of their points on what I have just said while you prepare for questions. So why don't I ask Dr. Genevieve?
Do I have any comments? Well, you come in my ear as a woman, so that's really interesting. I see you as a man, I hear you as a woman. It's an interesting augmented reality experience. It's very disturbing, in fact. I think for me, one of the most interesting things about all of that technology is that we forget that part of what makes us human is not total transparency. Part of what makes us human is our ability to withhold information and to keep things secret and even to tell small lies. And one of the challenges with certain sorts of technology is that it doesn't realize that. And its ability to blurt out the truth unbidden is really complicated. So, you know, because an augmented reality environment could tell you how much I actually weighed, or how old I really was, or how much exercise I did, or that I don't like your mother, even though I should. Those might not be things I want to tell you. And so imagining how we balance all the information that's available with the fact that as human beings, we like to keep certain things quiet, like our feelings about our relatives, like the things that are just the conventional kind of secrets, I think is a really interesting challenge, right? And there's a lot of data about what happens when certain sorts of information become available in ways that, as human beings, we don't necessarily intend. And I think for me, the really interesting thing to start balancing, and this particularly with the glasses scenario, is really this fact that as human beings, we don't want everything to be true and real. There are actually things we like to imagine might be true, that we sort of, that make us feel better about ourselves and the people around us. And I think there's a real challenge there about how you balance those things out.
What about Adrian?
What about you, Adrian?
Yes, I'm an engineer, but I was very convinced by your presentation, Genevieve, and I truly think that these technologies, unless we find, you know, something that we actually can't live without, I think that's going to be a real issue. That's why I think we've seen augmented reality. As far as I know, it's nearly 20 plus years of research, and I think the problem is, of course, technical issues, but at the same time, we really have to think, what are we going to use this for? I hear your comment about the privacy, but I also read an article where it was saying, you know, probably we'll develop, you know, direct brain interface sometime, and most people say we don't want to have that. But if your wife buys it and says, let's put these two things, you know, these hats on together, it'd be very hard to say no, because you say no, you say, what are you hiding from me? So sometimes the social norms might change when we have these technologies.
My sense is people will find new ways to lie. They will just stop thinking certain kinds of thoughts in order to not have them transmitted.
Right. Yes, we're human. Yeah.
Exactly.
Then Howard, what is your industrial viewpoint on that issue?
I don't know if it's exactly industrial.
이게 꼭 산업적인 시각이라고.
This is a dream. You know, Jules Verne had a dream when he wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And he imagined this source of infinite power. And that source of infinite, he didn't know what he was talking about, but he imagined that source of infinite power, and what it became nuclear. And it actually can be used for good things, and it can be used for not so good things. But so you need to have a dream. And the dream is that we would be able to step out of ourselves and be able to imagine something and experience something which isn't quite real. Now, the way we do that today is via games. Games are the closest we currently experience to some kind of augmented reality. It's definitely virtual, and the gaming business, speaking quite frankly, is a multi-billion-dollar business. So people want to play games. They really do. They don't want to be here, they want to be in there. So
But that's all about escaping from where you are now, right? That's not about I want more of the now. It's I want this completely immersive other thing.
It's true, but it's a dream. And so the question is, to what extent do dreams become part of our everyday existence? And in some of the industrial examples I showed, being able to project to something that's not exactly there, this has real value. It probably has real value in pharma. It definitely has real value in pedagogical endeavors, because we want to help people imagine. But it's still a dream. And one of the other points that I need you to understand is that the actual implementation of this will be very costly, extremely costly. And we take for granted the fact that we have these beautiful screens, and we take for granted the fact that we have excellent audio. But this has occurred over decades. And so it's very good that the Korean government is going to fund this for 10 years. And the reason it's good is because it will take 10 years to make this economically viable, and maybe longer.
Genevieve?
That was so emphatic. Yeah, where do you start with that? I mean, let's be clear. I'm not suggesting that virtual reality isn't going to happen, but I think for me what's clear is that, A, this is not a new thing. There have been virtual experiences for a very long time, and I would argue long before gaming. I think, anyone who's been to an ecstatic ritual of any kind, or been to church, or visited a shaman, or participated in a ritual, is participating, or drugs, thank you for that, not from me, from him. I think, that those are all about, chasing experiences beyond ourselves, right? That's always been a big thing. For me, I think the challenge becomes when we're starting to want to put more technology into the equation, which we know is going to take decades to become seamless. We know it relies on technologies that aren't necessarily particularly overly developed right now. It's going to mean battery life, better connectivity, more interesting algorithms. There's a lot of kind of technical stuff. And then I think to Adrian's point, what it feels like becomes really interesting. I mean, there have been heads-up displays. We were talking about this backstage, right? There have been heads-up displays for ever. But, the notion of all the other senses, touch, taste, smell, those things, not just sight and voice, that becomes really interesting.
It has to be visual first. There's no way it will be touch and smell first. It will be visual first.
Well, Howard is always interested in filling the bandwidth because he works for the network company.
It's true. It's true. This will consume a lot of bandwidth, and that's very good. But it will have to be visual.
I agree. The visual sense is definitely overwhelmingly the dominant sense. And, we were discussing before, you can put red dye in white wine and no one will detect it is not red wine because the visual sense is so overwhelming. But I still think that this will be another way of enhancing the experience. And I agree with you, the cost, because, I'm sure we can build some system with Cisco's hardware there, and we can feel what is it like to see the elephant in the savannah. But if it costs like $100,000, well, you might as well just fly there. So, there is going to be a trade-off point. Is it really worth making these technologies or doing something more useful for the world?
Well, but then I do think, I want to push a bit on this notion, I would, about it being visual and text and sound, right? Because I think one of the things that's really interesting is that a lot of the ways we've seen early virtual reality and mixed reality is that it's got to go for a very high level of verisimilitude. We want things that really look like real life, right? So in the medical space, in the pharmaceutical space, you want it to be as lifelike as possible because it's really not very useful to operate on something that isn't that way. But we know that part of what people experience in this world doesn't have to be a full-on replica of the real world to be exciting or interesting. And in fact, I think there's an argument that, some of the applications here that might be interesting don't have to be fully remaking the real world or fully engaging in a way that is about high levels of verisimilitude and simulacrum, that in fact, smell becomes interesting as a pervasive computing interface, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a literal translation, and it doesn't have to be full-time and real for it to be interesting.
I think the time is limited, so we have to give some opportunity to the floor. 질문하실 분들 있으신가요? 아니면 저희들끼리 또 제가 관심 있는 분야로 계속 토론하겠습니다.
Do you have any more questions, or should we continue our discussions ourselves?
Okay.
Over there.
예, 안녕하세요. 저는
Yes, good evening. My name is Cheok. I'm from Sejong INC. I really appreciate the insightful presentation on augmented reality. I would like to raise an issue about the ethical aspect of augmented reality. When it comes to communication, it helps people's dialogue, and with the development of equipment and also with development of various different sensory equipment, and also even going far into the future, telepathy-based communication is deemed to be possible. Now, in this process of evolution and development, let's say if we purely look at communication and a virtual delivery of information or virtual communication, when it comes to can it not be subject to some distortion because of the outside pressure and outside power? And I think that could have a severe effect on people, an individual. I guess what I'm trying to say is that before the cyber people are invented, they first came up with the code of ethics for robots, for instance. So if we are to go to the extreme of telepathy-based communication, what do you think is the ethical issue that we can think about?
I love that I get all these questions. Well, you know, as Asimov was a science fiction writer and was working about thinking through what it would mean to have robots in our lives, right, I think you can look to a great deal of science fiction in the last 100 years and see your answers about what it would mean to think about telepathy. And in most of science fiction where telepathy is possible, there are also categories of people who know how to block mind reading, who reject it, who know how to create fictive thoughts. And I think, you know, as we imagine, again, what does it mean to create different levels of transparency, there are always going to be people who want to inject other things into that system. And I think imagining that if you have telepathy and total transparency, that somehow we will get to complete mutual understanding is probably not backed up by data. I mean, even when we've had simultaneous translation and all sorts of diplomacy, we still see incredible miscommunications because it's not just about the words, it's about the intent, it's about the history, it's about the conceptual framework. And just because you can share thoughts doesn't mean you share understanding. And I think working through all of those things become incredibly complicated. And as you say, they're moral questions.
I think before we get to telepathy, we'll probably start to enhance our senses. And for example, you know, you could smell like a dog or a shark. You know, they can smell a drop of blood a kilometer away, or hear like a owl, or, you know, sense ultrasound like a bat. So I think that's going to happen. We will not just augment the senses, but enhance our senses. So before we reach that kind of brain-to-brain communication, I think we're going to enhance all of our senses. I'm not sure how that will relate to ethics, but, you know, animals already do that. So I think we will actually become closer to nature, to the way animals are already.
Okay, I think it's time to wrap up this panel session. 이 짧은 시간에 우리가
During this very short session, we cannot come to a final conclusion on augmented reality. But through this session, I hope that you were able to see that the augmented reality is indeed an interesting field that is worth your interest. I think that in itself is the great achievement of this session. The government of the Republic of Korea is investing in this area because they feel that this is an important area. We hope that the development of technologies in this field will contribute to the better lives of all of us. This brings us to the end of day 2 of the Seoul Digital Forum 2012. Thank you very much.